2019 BMW X3 that was due for a coolant flush, and it had a two expansion tanks. So I started doing research, and I know we ran across them before with two expansion tanks. So I think we actually ran into trouble once where we had we either did something with the cooling system, but then the low temperatures. Okay, so there's two different circuits: a high temperature circuit and a low temperature circuit. They are all part of one system that's controlled by valves. So if you do drain one, the other system will go low, but it won't completely drain both systems, just draining one system. So in the first page, there's just a diagram showing the two expansion tanks. The hose, I could not find a very nice circuit diagram that shows you the circuit flow and how they're intertwined and how they're separate. But on the second page, I'm going to read you. Oh, let me ask a question. I've only seen this on BMW. Have you guys seen it on any other cars?
Mercedes.
Yeah, Mercedes, okay. So, go ahead. They are not. They are controlled by valves, and the valves open up and intertwine at different times. And in my next reading, I will read, this is a non-BMW article. If you read the top portion of it, high-low temperature water cooling systems for combustion engines comprises a high temperature cooling circuit for the cooling of the engine and a low temperature cooling circuit for cooling a water-cooled charged air cooler for charged air to engine. Now, I did notice that the low temperature cooling system also cools the transmission on a BMW. I don't know if that's on Mercedes. This particular car that we're dealing with is a 2-liter turbo. I don't know if it's different for the 6 cylinders, but this is just something that we have to keep in mind when we're dealing with the cooling systems. The high temperature and low temperature cooling circuits are interconnected upstream and downstream. A coolant pump of the high temperature cooling circuit, the low temperature cooling circuit have a cooling pump of its own. Further, the low cooling circuit has a low temperature heat exchanger bypass, which is controlled by a multi-port valve, which enables at least 2 different operational modes to heat up, in which a hot coolant from the hot cooling circuit is used to heat the charged air in extremely cold ambient temperatures, and a cooling mode in which charged air is cooled in a traditional way. So I wish I had more specifics. I dug deep to find stuff for ProDemand. This is a generic statement about the high temperature, low temperature circuit. So just keep that in mind, that this doesn't hold true to every vehicle. If you turn to the next page, lo and behold, different coolant. Different coolant. And Sebastian and I both ran into this week with BMW. We opened the cap and it's green. Now, the green doesn't necessarily indicate anything, except for the fact that they put a different dye in it to indicate that it is not the same coolant that they used in the past. So we all know that we've been using blue coolant in BMWs, Mercedes. I think even Mercedes has changed it to yellow in certain years and models, so we have to pay attention that we're getting the right coolant for it. I don't know the principles, what's different about the coolant. I don't know if there's any high failure, but our job is to consistently do the same coolant. Now, what really brings this to our attention is the last page. If you look, this is a coolant flush for this particular vehicle. 2 separate operations, involves 2 separate draining procedures, and use of a scanner to purge the air on both systems. So you can see where this really caught my eye is that it's 4 hours to do a coolant flush on this car. 2 separate systems that are intertwined. According to what I read, yes, But I know for a fact we had a BMW that we did something with. This is before we actually really knew what the difference was between the high temperature and low temperature, but we had a comeback where the low temperature, the smaller expansion tank, which is the low temperature one, was low. And the simple fact was we bled the high temperature system, but it did deplete some of the coolant in the low temperature circuit. And we just had to top it off and do a bleeding procedure and everything was fine. So what to get out of this is when you see the two expansion tanks, it raises an eyebrow. If you're dealing with just a coolant flush, make sure you look up the procedure to do the proper draining procedure and the proper bleeding procedure. And if you're dealing with a check engine light or a coolant leak, again, look up the procedures, because this is our typical coolant flush is an hour and a half, and this one is 4 hours. With that being said, are you guys looking up Porsches? Because Porsches, we have to recommend a longer time to do coolant flushes. If you actually went through the procedure, there's so many different drains that they want you to drain, including hoses, because the radiator's up front, and just make sure you request the proper amount of time and bleed it properly so the problem doesn't happen. I wish I had more information. As soon as there's some kind of training from ATG on this circuit, I'll make sure to sign us all up, and this way we can get educated. And that's it. Anybody have any questions on this? Because I don't know if I can answer too many of them.
You want to know?
What's that?
What do you want to know?
It's not that I would love to be able, if somebody can come up with a circuit and actually show me like a circuit. I tried to find something, I couldn't, and I did find something that was blue and red, but then when I printed it, obviously we don't have a color printer, so it was gray, and it was very confusing, but I would love to see how it's separated. Meaning, I didn't go through this where you see 26 and 27.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what 27 is. I didn't go through it that deep.
27 is the oil cooler.
Okay, so that's just not a separate. Okay, there's two in. So one's the radiator,
Yeah.
and these are just coolers and.
Two is the heat exchanger.
Okay, gotcha, gotcha.
I would always know that they were both two separate systems because we were working here.
No, I know you
Here.
did. Sure.
And every cooling flush that I did, like, they never said, oh, make sure to look at the low side because they were completely separate.
Okay.
So that's weird that they would say it has a port. I've never heard of that.
Yeah, but it
Even
makes sense, because if the car is whatever temperature they decide is extremely cold,
Yeah.
they want to warm
Yeah.
it up, and they have the ability, because they have the high temperature cooling system, they can use that coolant to do it, so it makes sense.
I always, that's weird, because I always under the impression that it was a high pressure and a low pressure.
Yeah, they're called,
High temp and a low
yeah,
temp.
no, that's what people call them, a temperature, high temp and low temp.
Not what they say,
Sure.
one thing that I do know is that the low has to be vacuum filled.
Okay,
If it's not vacuum filled, you're never gonna get the air out of it.
understood. I know, does anybody else have any questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
It uses a different coolant because of the air cooler.
Okay.
Something about like something inside of it.
Like chemical reaction,
Yeah,
it doesn't
exactly.
work with materials that are in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, more scientific stuff that we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do want to touch base on this Audi. Bob, this car's over 10 years old, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. At some point in time, I don't know the history of it, but one of us should have recommended a timing belt on this car, even though it's low miles, what, 50?
55,
Yeah.
only had low mileage.
Yeah, so anything over 10 years old, we gotta recommend, excuse me, a timing belt. Just do by time, let the service advisors acknowledge it to the customer. They can choose to do it or not do it. Both Bob and I dropped the ball where we thought the water pump was circulating and it wasn't. It took 3 minutes to look up on Identifix how to check how it's circulating. The end result is, we would have put a thermostat in it anyway, so I'm not really that concerned about it. But it would have been just one phone call to do the thermostat and the water pump. That's it. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. We're all set. Thanks, Chris.